Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Although Harry Potter is still considered one of the greatest works of modern times, the path to its creation was far from perfect. Over the years, J.K. Rowling herself admitted that some of her plot decisions became a source of regret. Today, I'll tell you about the moments the author wished she could change. Enjoy the video. Number 1. The epilogue. Let's start at the end, with the epilogue that was meant to put a beautiful full stop to the story. 19 years later, Harry, Ron, and Hermione are sending their children off to Hogwarts, a symbolic moment since the entire saga began the same way. However, J.K. Rowling later admitted that she wasn't entirely happy with this ending. According to her, the original idea was to conclude the story with a graduation ball scene where the heroes celebrate the end of their school years. But after the Battle of Hogwarts, that scene felt emotionally inappropriate, so she decided to end it differently. Later, Rowling apologized to readers who would have preferred a different conclusion, one less family-oriented and more open-ended. Number 2. Ron and Hermione. One of Rowling's most debated choices is pairing Ron and Hermione. While their mutual affection in the Goblet of Fire seemed more like teenage awkwardness, by the end of the series they suddenly appeared destined for each other. After the release of the final book, fans flooded Rowling with letters questioning whether such a relationship could realistically last even a year, let alone the 19 years shown in the epilogue. Rowling later admitted, yes, it wasn't her best decision. She made that choice for the sake of dramatic closure rather than from the internal logic of the characters. Interestingly, the actors agreed. Emma Watson publicly supported Rowling's admission, and Rupert Grint once joked that his Ron probably lives alone in a small apartment somewhere, working in a workshop, far from family quarrels. Number 3. Dobby. The house elf Dobby first appeared in the Chamber of Secrets. Loud, annoying, and seemingly an enemy to Harry, yet later he became one of the most touching and beloved characters in the saga. His death by Bellatrix Lestrange's dagger was one of the most emotional moments in the entire series. Years later, Rowling admitted how hard it was for her to make that decision. She apologized to fans, especially those who couldn't hold back tears during Dobby's final scene. Still, in one interview, she added that she might not have changed it even if she could, because that moment gives the story emotional depth and shows the true price of freedom and friendship. Number 4. Severus Snape. Snape's death in the final book came as a true shock. After the Deathly Hallows, fans even created a theory that Snape had survived. As a potions master, he could have carried an antidote with him. Rowling sadly confirmed, no, his fate was sealed. Later, she admitted regretting Snape's death, calling him one of the deepest and most complex characters she'd ever written. However, she also noted that his tragic ending is what made him unforgettable, a hero whose actions were understood only too late. Number 5. The Bulldogs. And finally, a funny but telling example. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Aunt Marge appears with her bulldogs described by Rowling as fierce, evil, and dangerous. Later, upon learning that English bulldogs are actually gentle and well-balanced dogs, Rowling admitted that she simply didn't know their true nature. She apologized to all bulldog owners and readers who might have formed a wrong impression of the breed. Number 6. Fred Weasley's death. Fred Weasley's laughter was the sound of home. From the first book to the last, he and George filled Hogwarts with light and mischief. Fireworks in the Great Hall, enchanted candies, endless jokes that made even dark days bearable. During the Battle of Hogwarts, that laughter was silenced. A blast ripped through the castle, and when the dust cleared, Fred lay still, his eyes staring without seeing. For a moment, the war stopped. Percy knelt beside him, sobbing, while George stood frozen, half of himself gone forever. Readers felt the same hollow ache. J.K. Rowling later admitted that writing Fred's death broke her heart. "It was the worst for me," she confessed, "because the Weasleys were the soul of the story." She said the loss was meant to show the cost of war, that even joy could be destroyed. But years later she apologized, saying she still thought of George and what it meant for him to live without his twin. To this day, fans name Fred's death as the hardest page to read, not because it was unexpected, but because it felt like losing a friend who had always made them smile. Number 7. The Bathilda Bagshot scene. The visit to Godric's Hollow was meant to be a quiet return, a moment of memory and grief. Instead, it became one of the most terrifying scenes in the Deathly Hallows. Harry and Hermione followed the frail old historian, Bathilda Bagshot, into her dark, rotting house. The silence was thick, broken only by the creak of floorboards. And then it happened. Bathilda's body twisted unnaturally, her skin splitting as Nagini slithered out. The snake lunged, and Harry barely had time to raise his wand. It was not just magic, and it was horror. Readers and viewers alike were shaken. The film turned the moment into pure nightmare. The snake emerging from the corpse, Harry trapped in the room, unable to breathe. Parents wrote that their children had nightmares. Adults admitted they looked away. Even for a story about death and war, the scene felt different, darker, colder, almost cruelly in its realism. The boy who once caught the snitch was now facing death in its rawest form. J.K. Rowling later acknowledged that she may have gone too far. It was meant to show how close Harry was to the edge, to losing everything, she said, but I think I might have overdone it. The moment, she explained, was designed to strip away any illusion of safety, and it worked. That encounter with Nagini was more than fear. It was a turning point. From then on, there was no innocence left, no light in the shadows, only survival. Number 8. Colin Creevey's fate. Colin Creevey was small, eager, and endlessly loyal. From the moment he met Harry in the Chamber of Secrets, camera clutched in his trembling hands, his admiration was pure and childlike. "Wow, it's really you," he gasped, eyes wide with wonder. To many readers, Colin embodied innocence. The simple belief that heroes were real and good always triumphed. He never stopped believing in Harry even when the world turned against him. That's why his death in the Deathly Hallows cut so deeply. Colin, who wasn't even supposed to be at Hogwarts, snuck in to fight. When his body was found among the fallen, it was described in one short line. They carried Colin Creevey, small and pale, up the steps. And then, nothing. No thought from Harry, no words, no farewell. The boy who once idolized him died a hero, and his death slipped past like a whisper. For fans, that silence was almost unbearable. Later, J.K. Rowling admitted that Colin deserved more. There were too many deaths, too much happening, she said, and some characters were left in the shadows. But for readers, Colin wasn't a shadow. He was courage in its purest form, a boy who fought because he believed. And even without Harry's words, his story still speaks. Not all heroes need to be noticed to matter. Number 9. Lupin and Tonks. Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks were a rare light in the dark days of the Wizarding War. Their love was quiet but brave, born out of fear, tested by war, and sealed by courage. When Lupin hesitated to marry her because of his lycanthropy, Tonks simply said, "I don't care about any of that." Her words were a spark against the gloom that surrounded them. They represented hope, proof that love could exist even in a world falling apart. But hope was short-lived. In the Deathly Hallows, their names appear among the dead after the Battle of Hogwarts. "Remus, Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks," McGonagall whispered, as if the words themselves could break her heart. There was no dramatic farewell, no lingering goodbye, only a sentence, cold and final. When Harry saw their bodies lying side by side in the Great Hall, he thought of his parents, who had died the same way, leaving a child behind. The circle had closed, the past had repeated itself. Rowling later explained that she wrote their deaths as a deliberate mirror to Lily and James Potter. "I wanted to show the next generation stepping forward while the old one falls," she said. "It was symmetry and tragedy." Yet even she confessed that this was one of the hardest choices she ever made. Years later, she apologized to readers during a fan event, saying, "I'm sorry, I truly am. Lupin and Tonks didn't deserve it." Their story remains one of the most painful losses in the series. They had fought for a world their son would never know them in. Teddy Lupin, their orphaned child, would grow up with Harry as his godfather, just as Harry once grew up without his own parents. It was poetic, yes, but also cruel. Readers still imagine an alternate ending, one where Lupin, with his tired smile, and Tonks with her ever-changing hair, watch their son take his first steps in a world finally free from war. Number 10. No Funeral for Sirius Black. Sirius Black was more than Harry's godfather. He was the family Harry had always longed for. In the Order of the Phoenix, their bond felt fragile yet powerful, like a light hidden inside the darkness of war. Sirius gave Harry a home at number 12, Grimmauld Place, and words that no one else had ever said to him. "You're not your father, Harry, but you're so much like him." That sentence carried warmth, pride, and love, a kind of love Harry had almost forgotten existed. And then, in an instant, it was gone. During the battle at the Department of Mysteries, a flash of light from Bellatrix Lestrange's wand sent Sirius falling through the veil. The book described it simply. He fell through the ancient archway and disappeared. No body, no goodbye, just silence. The reader, like Harry, waited for him to come back, but he never did. The grief came sharp and cold, yet Rowling did not linger on it. The story moved forward, leaving the pain suspended in the air, like dust after a storm. Later, J.K. Rowling admitted she regretted that choice. She explained that the absence of a funeral was meant to show Harry's numbness, his inability to process what had happened. "Harry wasn't ready to grieve," she said in an interview, "but maybe the readers were." Those few words echoed deeply among fans who had grown attached to Sirius. They wanted a farewell not just for Harry's godfather, but for the man who represented rebellion, loyalty, and love in a world drowning in fear. Imagine that scene, the Order gathered quietly in Grimmauld Place, the portrait of Walburga silenced for once, and Harry standing with clenched fists, unable to speak. That moment never came, and perhaps that's what makes Sirius's death so haunting. His fall was not only physical, but emotional, swallowed by the veil and by silence. Readers never got the closure they needed, and in that way Sirius remains exactly as Harry saw him last, vanishing halfway between the living and the dead. Number 11, Hedwig's Death. Hedwig's death came like a lightning strike. One moment she was soaring beside Harry's broom, her white feathers glowing against the stormy sky. The next, a flash of green light ended it all. It happened in the Deathly Hallows during the chaotic escape from Privet Drive. The owls screeched and fell to the bottom of her cage, Rowling wrote, a line that froze readers. It wasn't just a pet dying, it was innocence, loyalty, and childhood itself falling from the sky. For 6 books, Hedwig had been more than a companion. She was Harry's first birthday gift, his first true friend in a world that once locked him in a cupboard. When the Dursleys treated him with cruelty, Hedwig waited faithfully by the window, a silent symbol of freedom. She carried letters, hope, and sometimes defiance. Every time she spread her wings, Harry felt less alone. Her death wasn't just the loss of an owl, it was the loss of the last peaceful piece of his youth. J.K. Rowling later explained her decision. Hedwig, she said, represented the end of childhood. Her death marked the moment Harry could no longer look back, but years later she admitted she regretted it. "Yes, I killed the owl, I'm sorry," she confessed in an interview. Fans never quite forgave her, not out of anger but heartbreak. For them, Hedwig had been family, watching over Harry when no one else did. Even now, readers remember that moment with pain. When Hedwig fell, it wasn't only the beginning of the war, it was the end of something pure. The cage shattered, and with it, the safety of the world Harry once knew. As the broom sped into the dark, he shouted her name, but there was no answer. Only silence, the kind that follows when innocence finally dies. Number 12. The Abandoned Story of the Marauders. The Marauders, Sirius Black, James Potter, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew were more than just mischievous students. They were the heart of a forgotten Hogwarts legend. Together they roamed the castle's corridors under the silver light of the full moon, guided by their secret creation, the Marauders' Map. "I solemnly swear that I'm up to no good," whispered Fred and George years later, never realizing that the map they held was born from friendship, rebellion, and pain. Rowling gave us glimpses of their story, moments that hinted at a deeper, richer past. We saw James as the arrogant Quidditch star who saved Snape from Lupin's werewolf form. We heard Sirius speak with pride of the group's animagus secret. How he became Padfoot, James was Prongs, and Peter was Wormtail, all to protect their friend Remus. Yet those moments were fragments, not the full tale. Readers could feel the ghosts of their laughter echoing in the halls, but the doors to their youth remained closed. In interviews, J.K. Rowling herself admitted regret. "If I had more time," she said, "I would have written a separate book about the Marauders." That single line was enough to ignite hope among fans. They imagined what could have been, nights of plotting, forbidden magic, and the slow betrayal that would one day shatter their brotherhood. It was a story waiting to be told, a missing piece of the wizarding world. The tragedy of the Marauders lies not only in their deaths, but in the silence around their lives. How did James forgive Sirius for risking Snape's life? What did Lupin feel as he watched his friends drift apart? When did Peter's loyalty begin to rot? The books give us answers in shadow and echo, but not in voice. And so, to this day, fans still whisper the same wish, a story that begins not with Harry, but with the 4 boys who taught him what friendship and betrayal truly mean. Number 13, Percy Weasley's redemption arc. When readers first met Percy Weasley, he was the very picture of ambition wrapped in a Gryffindor robe. His polished prefect badge gleamed with the pride of a young man who craved recognition, not out of vanity alone, but from a desperate need to stand out among 6 brothers and a sister. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Percy's self-importance was almost comical. He strutted through the corridors of Hogwarts with an air of superiority, reprimanding Fred and George as if he were already part of the Ministry of Magic. To many readers, he was the stiff brother, pompous but harmless. Yet behind his formality and his endless lectures about rules, there was a boy quietly trying to prove he mattered. As the series unfolded, Percy's ambition began to take a darker shape. In the Goblet of Fire, his enthusiasm for his work at the Ministry of Magic became almost obsessive. He looked up to Bartemius Crouch as a mentor, admiring his rigid discipline and authority. When Crouch's mysterious illness began to unravel the truth of his household, Percy's inability to see the moral complexities of his world became painfully clear. "Mr. Crouch is indisposed, but I assure you everything is under control," he told anyone who asked, repeating the official line even when the truth trembled beneath his feet. This moment marked the start of Percy's descent, not into evil, but into blindness. He trusted authority so completely that he forgot to trust his own family. By the time the Order of the Phoenix began, the Weasley home at the Burrow was split in two. Percy had chosen the Ministry, which at that time was denying Voldemort's return, over his own parents. He sent a cold, formal letter to Ron, advising him to distance himself from Harry Potter, who had become a political liability. The letter was chilling in its precision, devoid of affection. "It's high time you realize that you're not a child anymore, and that you must choose your company carefully." Molly Weasley cried over that letter while Fred and George mocked it, calling Percy His Majesty. But beneath their jokes was genuine pain. Their brother had abandoned them for a desk and a title. Percy's betrayal stung because it felt so real. Rowling crafted it not as a villainous turn, but as the kind of painful decision someone might actually make. Choosing social status and approval over messy, imperfect love. His alignment with Cornelius Fudge and later Rufus Scrimgeour showed how loyalty could become corruption when stripped of empathy. Percy wasn't cruel. He was terrified of being wrong. That made his choices more tragic than hateful. He clung to the Ministry's lies because they were comfortable, orderly, and allowed him to believe he had control. Then came the silence. For 2 entire books, Percy vanished from his family's life. He didn't appear at Bill's wedding, didn't send messages during the chaos of Voldemort's rise, didn't reach out when his family became targets. He wasn't even mentioned at key moments, and readers began to wonder whether Rowling had forgotten him. When Percy finally reappeared in the Deathly Hallows, walking into the Battle of Hogwarts to stand beside his family, it felt sudden, almost too sudden. One moment he was the Ministry's man, the next he was weeping in his brother's arms. "I was a fool," he said, through tears. "I was an idiot. I was a pompous prat." It was a confession that came with sincerity, yet it arrived with no build-up, no visible journey that led him there. J.K. Rowling later admitted she regretted not giving Percy's redemption the depth it deserved. In interviews, she confessed that she had planned more moments showing his internal struggle, small cracks in his loyalty to the Ministry, perhaps letters written and unsent, or late-night doubts as the truth about Voldemort became undeniable. But in the rush of storytelling, these fragments were lost. "I wish I had given Percy more space," she said. "He needed time to earn that forgiveness." Readers agreed. They wanted to see the slow realization, the guilt eating away at him, the sleepless nights where he might have reread Ron's letter and wondered what he'd become. The tragedy of Percy's arc lies in what it could have been. Imagine, for instance, if during the events of the Half-Blood Prince, Percy had secretly attended Dumbledore's funeral, standing in the crowd, unseen, unable to speak, but mourning nonetheless. Or if he had sent his mother a coded letter, risking exposure just to tell her he was sorry. Such scenes would have turned his final return into a crescendo rather than a sudden note of repentance. Instead, We saw him walk back into his family's lives at the last possible moment. And while it was moving, it lacked the emotional architecture to support its weight. When Percy returned, his timing was both poetic and cruel. The Battle of Hogwarts was not the place for redemption. It was a place for survival. Yet Rowling made the choice to have his reconciliation occur in the middle of chaos. The Weasleys embraced him without hesitation, because in that moment none of them could afford to hold grudges. Fred, ever the Joker, was delighted to have his brother back. "Did I hear you right?" he said with a grin, moments before the world fell apart. That grin would be his last. When Fred died, the one who knelt beside him was Percy, not Ron, not George, but the brother who had abandoned him. The symbolism was devastating. Percy, the outcast, was forced to hold his brother's body in his arms, screaming into the rubble as if paying penance for every cold word he had ever spoken. Number 14, Luna Lovegood's limited role. There was something ethereal about Luna Lovegood from the very first moment she appeared on the Hogwarts Express. With her radish earrings and her dreamy voice, she seemed to inhabit a world slightly out of sync with everyone else's. When Harry, Hermione and Ron met her in the Order of the Phoenix, readers instantly recognized in Luna a rare blend of eccentricity and purity. She could speak about imaginary creatures and at the same time pierce through the emotional fog that surrounded Harry after Sirius Black's death. Her line, "You're not going mad, I can see them too," referring to the Thestrals, became a quiet revelation and a symbol of shared grief and unseen truth. It was in that simple moment that Luna became more than comic relief. She became an anchor of compassion and honesty. As the series progressed, Luna's presence evolved from oddity to strength. When most students at Hogwarts chose to avoid Harry during his most difficult times, Luna remained beside him. In The Half-Blood Prince, she accompanied him to Professor Slughorn's party when no one else dared to. Harry himself reflected that she made him feel oddly comfortable. Luna didn't care about popularity or appearances. She saw people as they truly were. Her kindness was never loud, it was luminous. Yet as the saga moved toward its dramatic climax, fans began to notice something strange. Luna's light began to fade from the pages. In the Deathly Hallows, she reappeared briefly at the wedding of Bill and Fleur, offering a few lines that reminded readers of her whimsical wisdom. She wore a bright yellow dress and a sunflower in her hair, saying serenely that it matched the occasion. That short appearance felt like a breath of calm before the storm. But as the story plunged into darkness, Luna seemed to vanish from sight. For long stretches of the book there was no trace of her, as if her voice, once so distinct, had been silenced by the growing chaos of war. When Luna was finally found imprisoned in the cellar of Malfoy Manor, the moment carried enormous emotional potential. She had been captured by Death Eaters, punished for her father's support of Harry Potter in the Quibbler. When Harry, Ron and Hermione arrived there, they found her pale but composed, whispering encouragement to the others. "Don't worry, Harry," she said quietly. "We'll get out of here." Even as a prisoner, Luna embodied serenity and courage. Yet the scene passed quickly, almost too quickly, and readers who had longed for her to play a pivotal role felt an ache of incompletion. Joanne Rowling later acknowledged that feeling. In an interview years after the final book's release, she said, "Luna is one of my favorite characters. If I could go back, I would give her more space. Her voice deserved more." That confession struck readers deeply because it validated what so many had felt, that Luna's story had been left partially untold. The war had changed everyone, Harry, Hermione, Ron, Neville, and we saw how each grew through the struggle. But Luna's transformation remained a mystery. We never witnessed her inner battles, her moments of despair, or her triumphs beyond survival. Rowling did offer glimpses of Luna's later life in brief notes and in The Cursed Child. She became a naturalist, married Rolf Scamander, the grandson of Newt Scamander, and had twin sons Lorcan and Lysander. Yet even these details felt like fragments from a story never fully written. In The Cursed Child, she appeared only in passing, like a ghost from another age, a character remembered fondly but rarely seen. Her wisdom, her unique way of perceiving the world, seemed destined to live more in memory than in action. Readers had expected Luna to stand at the forefront of the resistance, perhaps beside Neville in the final battle for Hogwarts. After all, she had joined Dumbledore's army from the very beginning and had shown fearless loyalty. Her belief in things unseen, once treated as foolishness, had become a metaphor for faith itself. But during the climactic scenes, when spells shattered the Great Hall and old heroes fell, Luna's role was minimal. She appeared briefly to suggest that Harry used the Ravenclaw diadem to find the final Horcrux. An essential insight, yes, but fleeting. Then she faded again into the background, while the spotlight turned to others. Many fans felt that Luna could have served as the emotional compass in those final chapters, guiding Harry through doubt and fear. She had always understood him in ways others could not. In the Order of the Phoenix, when he mourned Sirius, Luna quietly said, "The things we lose have a way of coming back to us in the end, if not always in the way we expect." That sentence captured the philosophy of the entire saga: hope amid loss, belief beyond reason. It was precisely that wisdom the war-torn Harry needed as he faced death. But the book left little room for such reflection. Luna's compassion, once a defining force, was replaced by the relentless pace of battle. Rowling's regret over Luna's silence has become one of the more discussed creative confessions in modern fantasy literature. It revealed the human side of storytelling, the impossibility of giving every beloved character their due. The author built an immense universe with dozens of intersecting arcs, and yet, even within that grand design, some voices were muted. Luna's was one of them. She represented imagination, kindness, and the courage to be different, values that readers, especially young ones, clung to. When that voice faded, it felt like losing a friend. Number 15, Draco Malfoy's abrupt ending. There was a moment in the world of Harry Potter that J.K. Rowling herself later admitted she regretted not exploring more deeply: the fate of Draco Malfoy. From the very first book, he stood as the mirror opposite of Harry, a spoiled, sneering boy from an ancient pureblood family who embodied everything Harry was taught to resist. "You'll soon find out some wizarding families are much better than others, Potter," Draco says in The Philosopher's Stone, his voice dripping with arrogance. That single sentence cemented his image in the reader's minds as the symbol of privilege and prejudice. Yet, as the story grew darker and more mature, Draco's character began to reveal cracks beneath his perfect Slytherin composure. Those cracks were human: fear, guilt, confusion. And it is precisely that humanity which Rowling later confessed she wished she had developed further. By the time the 6th book, The Half-Blood Prince, arrived, Draco was no longer the one-dimensional bully of Hogwarts corridors. The weight of his family's name had become a curse rather than a crown. The once proud Malfoys were now humiliated. Their home, a headquarters for Voldemort's Death Eaters, their loyalty demanded at wand point. Narcissa Malfoy's trembling voice in the opening chapter, as she pleads with Severus Snape to protect her son, reveals everything. If Draco fails, Voldemort will kill him. The reader suddenly understands that behind Draco's smirk stands a terrified boy being forced into a game he never wanted to play. He is assigned to murder Albus Dumbledore, a task that even the most hardened Death Eaters would fear. Rowling managed, perhaps for the first time, to make her audience feel sympathy for a Malfoy. Draco's scenes in The Half-Blood Prince pulse with silent despair. He spends hours in the Room of Requirement, desperately repairing the vanishing cabinet, hoping that by succeeding in his task, he can save his parents. Gone is the swaggering boy who mocked Hagrid's hut and Hermione's heritage. In his place stands a trembling young man with dark circles under his eyes, constantly glancing over his shoulder. When Dumbledore confronts him atop the astronomy tower, readers expect a villain's triumph. Instead, we witness one of the series' most haunting moments of moral paralysis. No one can help. "I've got to do it!" Draco cries, his wand shaking. He cannot kill. He doesn't want to kill. And in that hesitation, is that tearful, breathless moment of weakness, Rowling gave Draco his humanity. Yet she never fully allowed that humanity to blossom into redemption. In interviews years later, Rowling admitted that Draco's story ended too abruptly. The war finished, Voldemort was defeated, and Draco survived. But his inner transformation remained unfinished. Readers were told he married Astoria Greengrass and had a son, Scorpius, yet none of this appeared on the page in emotional depth. There was no scene of remorse, no confrontation with his past, no moment of gratitude toward Harry, who had once saved him twice. Once from the fiend fire in the Room of Requirement, and once, indirectly, from his own choices. Many fans felt this absence keenly. They longed for a small gesture, a line, perhaps even a glance across the Great Hall that acknowledged forgiveness. But the books ended in silence, as if Draco's guilt had been quietly locked away. Rowling once explained that she did not want to romanticize Draco. She worried that giving him a grand redemption might lead readers to sympathize too deeply with a character who, despite his fear, had still chosen cruelty many times. "Draco is not a hero," she said. "He was a product of his upbringing." But the tragedy lies in that very explanation, that a boy so conditioned by his family's prejudices could glimpse the light, yet never fully step into it. By denying him that moment of reckoning, Rowling left him suspended. Between darkness and redemption, a ghost of potential rather than a completed arc. It is striking to recall that Harry himself once saved Draco's life during the Battle of Hogwarts. As the flames of cursed fire engulfed the Room of Requirement, Harry and Ron dragged Draco and his fellow Slytherin, Blaise Zabini, from certain death. It was a pure act of mercy, uncalculated, unspoken. "It's me he saved, not you!" Draco shouts at Crabbe's body, though even then his pride masks the shock. That moment could have become the seed for reconciliation, the moment when the old walls between Slytherin and Gryffindor finally cracked. Instead, it was left as a fleeting footnote in a world desperate for healing. When the epilogue of the Deathly Hallows arrived, 19 years later, readers caught only a glimpse of the man Draco had become. He stood on platform 9 3/4, a pale, silent figure, watching his son board the Hogwarts Express. His eyes met Harry's across the station, a brief, distant acknowledgement of shared history. They looked at each other but didn't speak, the narration tells us. That line carried both peace and melancholy. The silence between them was filled with everything unsaid, apologies never spoken, forgiveness never requested, understanding never reached. Rowling later revealed that she regretted this. Draco's story, she said, deserved a more complete resolution. Indeed, Draco's journey had all the ingredients of a powerful redemption arc. He was the privileged child taught to despise others, who then tasted the consequences of that hatred. He was forced to confront the emptiness of his father's ideology and the cruelty of those he once idolized. His refusal to kill Dumbledore marked the moral turning point of his life. From that moment on, he ceased to be Voldemort's servant and became something fragile yet noble. A survivor, haunted by conscience. A scene in which he sought forgiveness from Harry, Hermione, or even from himself would have elevated him from supporting antagonist to tragic anti-hero. Number 16. The Disappearance of Cho Chang. In the world of Harry Potter, where every character, even the most minor, seems to have their own story, few figures disappeared as quietly and as sadly as Cho Chang. Once the bright spark of Harry's teenage affection, her departure from the saga left a sense of unfinished melody, a note that should have echoed longer. When J.K. Rowling later admitted that she regretted writing Cho out of the story too soon, fans finally felt their intuition had been validated. Cho wasn't just a fleeting romance, she was the mirror of Harry's first emotional awakening, and her abrupt exit felt like a wound that had never fully healed. When readers first met Cho Chang in The Prisoner of Azkaban, she was not introduced as a central figure, but rather as a distant fascination, a girl with a kind smile and an air of calm confidence. Harry noticed her on the Quidditch field, where she flew as graceful as a swan, and that single image became etched in his imagination. She represented a kind of peace that his chaotic life rarely offered. Cho was Ravenclaw's seeker, a clever, poised student, admired by many. For Harry, whose existence had been marked by danger and loss, she symbolized something almost unreachable, a normal teenage crush, pure and human amid the madness of prophecy. By the Goblet of Fire, Rowling transformed that innocent admiration into a real thread of emotional tension. The Yule Ball scene became one of the most memorable in the series precisely because it revealed Harry's vulnerability. He struggled to gather the courage to ask Cho out, rehearsing in his mind how to speak to her. When he finally did, the heartbreak of hearing her gentle reply, "Oh, Harry, I'm sorry, but I'm going with Cedric," was painfully relatable. It was a simple moment of rejection, yet it showed the first crack in Harry's growing heart. Cho's choice to attend the ball with Cedric Diggory was not a betrayal. It was a reflection of her kindness and maturity, choosing someone who had already shown interest and confidence. Still, for Harry, that night was one of quiet humiliation and silent acceptance. Then came the Order of the Phoenix, where Cho's character took a darker, more human turn. Her world was shattered after Cedric's death, an event that marked one of the most devastating emotional shifts in the series. Rowling described Cho's grief not as elegant sorrow, but as something messy and raw. Her eyes were swimming with tears, the text says, during her first encounter with Harry in the Room of Requirement. In those moments, readers saw not a graceful Ravenclaw beauty, but a broken teenager, lost in mourning. She was the first to embody the true cost of Voldemort's return, an ordinary girl carrying unbearable loss. Her tears were the quiet echo of the war to come. Harry's relationship with Cho during that year was both tender and doomed. Their first kiss, awkward and trembling, took place under the mistletoe, surrounded by whispers of rebellion and fear. "A wet kiss," Rowling wrote, capturing perfectly the confusion of youth. It was not a cinematic moment, but an honest one. Cho cried while kissing him, unable to separate her affection for Harry from her grief for Cedric. This emotional complexity, though uncomfortable, was real. Yet, instead of developing her story further, Rowling began to shift her away from the main narrative. Cho's vulnerability became, unfairly, her defining trait, while Harry's frustration with her sadness made their bond seem trivial. The infamous fallout between them, sparked by Cho's friend Marietta Edgecombe betraying Dumbledore's army, cemented her exit from the central story. Cho's defense of her friend, combined with Harry's anger, turned what could have been a deep emotional journey into a misunderstanding. "She's crying again," Hermione said with a tone that seemed to dismiss Cho's pain. Many readers felt this was the moment where Rowling allowed Cho to become a symbol of weakness rather than resilience. After all, she was a student caught between loyalty to her house and the resistance movement, between grief and love. But instead of exploring this tension, the narrative simply moved on, leaving her stranded in emotional limbo. It was after this book that Cho Chang, once a vivid presence, began to fade like a ghost. By the time the Half-Blood Prince arrived, she was gone from the story almost entirely, replaced in Harry's affections by Ginny Weasley. The transition was so abrupt that it left fans puzzled. There was no closure, no quiet moment where Cho accepted her loss or made peace with Harry. She simply vanished, her once bright storyline swallowed by the growing storm of war. Readers who had seen in her a symbol of first love and first grief felt a sense of narrative injustice. It wasn't that Harry had to end up with her. It was that her story deserved an ending of its own. When The Deathly Hallows was released, Cho reappeared briefly during the Battle of Hogwarts. She offered to help find Ravenclaw's lost diadem, and her line, "I can take you to the common room, Harry," was almost haunting in its simplicity. Here she was, a survivor, still brave enough to stand with those who had once doubted her. But the moment passed in a flash. She was pushed out of the spotlight as soon as Ginny appeared, as though the narrative could not allow both women to exist meaningfully in the same space. It was this fleeting reappearance that later haunted Rowling herself. In an interview, she admitted, "I wish I had done more with Cho. She lost so much and I moved on too fast. That was unfair to her." Fans had long sensed that regret. Cho's story was more than a subplot. It was the emotional map of Harry's adolescence. She embodied the themes of loss, guilt, and the inability to save everyone you love. Her grief mirrored his own after Sirius's death. Her fear reflected his doubts about Dumbledore's army. Together they could have shown a deeper portrait of how young people survive trauma, but instead Cho became a casualty of narrative economy, removed to make room for the final war, reduced to a memory when she should have been a testament to endurance. Some readers have argued that Rowling's treatment of Cho reflected a larger discomfort in writing about emotional fragility. Hermione and Ginny were portrayed as strong, decisive, and action-driven, while Cho's sorrow made her seem less heroic. Yet real grief is not weakness, it is humanity. By rushing her departure, the story lost a chance to show how ordinary people grieve in extraordinary times. Imagine if during the Battle of Hogwarts Cho had confronted the memory of Cedric, or found redemption through courage rather than disappearance. That moment could have turned her from a forgotten name into a symbol of quiet strength. It is also worth noting how Cho's story resonated with readers from minority backgrounds. As one of the few East Asian characters in the series, she carried a quiet weight of representation. Many young readers saw in her a reflection of themselves, only to watch her fade without justice. Rowling never intended harm, yet her later apology acknowledged this unspoken disappointment. In her own words, she said, "Cho deserved more healing, and I didn't give it to her." It was a rare admission of creative regret, a sign of how even great authors can overlook the quiet characters who matter most. Despite her brief screen time, Cho's cinematic portrayal by Katie Leung deepened her legacy. Leung's delicate yet dignified performance gave Cho a life that the later books had denied her. She captured the ache of first love and the helplessness of loss with minimal dialogue, allowing emotion to speak through her silence. Even today, fans rewatch her scenes with a mixture of tenderness and sadness, imagining what might have been if the books had followed through on her emotional journey. Cho Chang remains in many ways one of the most human figures in the Harry Potter universe. She was neither a hero nor a villain, neither destined for glory nor designed for tragedy. She was simply a girl trying to navigate love and loss in a world falling apart. That realism is precisely what made her so important. By erasing her too quickly, the narrative lost a chance to explore a side of the magical world that was painfully real, the aftermath of grief, the slow healing of the heart. In the end, Rowling's apology was not just about one character, it was a reflection of the limits of storytelling itself. In a saga so full of wars, prophecies, and grand destinies, the quiet pain of one girl was easy to overlook. Yet years later, her absence still lingers like an empty seat at the Ravenclaw table. It reminds readers that every story, no matter how magical, carries shadows of what might have been. Cho Chang's unfinished tale is one of them, a fragile reminder that even in the world of wands and wonders, the human heart is the hardest magic of all. Number 17, lack of equal focus on all houses. It began as an innocent narrative choice, a focus on one boy, one house, one destiny. Yet as the years went on, J.K. Rowling would come to admit that this very decision created one of the most quietly regrettable imbalances in the entire Harry Potter saga. The uneven representation of Hogwarts' four houses. Gryffindor, the House of the Brave, became the beating heart of the series, while the others, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Slytherin, were cast in dimmer light. Readers grew up knowing the names of every Gryffindor student, their common room, their tower, their victories. But what of the rest? They were often left as shadows in the corridors, little more than decorative banners in the Great Hall. Rowling herself once confessed that this narrative tilt was, in her words, an unintended form of favoritism. From the very first book, the imbalance was evident. When the Sorting Hat declared, "You might belong in Gryffindor where dwell the brave at heart," it was clear that bravery and nobility would define the story's moral compass. The heroes, Harry, Hermione, and Ron, all wore scarlet and gold. The villains, almost without exception, came from the green and silver of Slytherin. Even Draco Malfoy's sneering tone was enough to cement the stereotype that every Slytherin was corrupt or cruel. The problem, Rowling later admitted, was that this simplicity of good versus evil left little room for nuance. She acknowledged in an interview that she should have explored more of what made each house valuable, and that by focusing so tightly on the Gryffindor-Slytherin rivalry, she unintentionally encouraged division among readers. Hufflepuff, in particular, bore the brunt of that neglect. Loyal, kind, hard-working, yet rarely heroic in the conventional sense, Hufflepuff was treated as the house for those who did not fit elsewhere. The Sorting Hat itself once sang, "I'll teach the lot and treat them all the same." But in the narrative, equality among the houses was never achieved. For many fans, this house became a running joke, the background to the drama of greater players. The name Hufflepuff was even used humorously by characters like Draco Malfoy, who sneered that it was the house for duffers. Yet within that house lived Cedric Diggory, a student who embodied quiet strength and fairness, a young man who would go on to represent everything noble about being kind and decent in a world obsessed with glory. When Cedric was killed by Peter Pettigrew in the Goblet of Fire, it was perhaps the first and only moment the story paused to honour Hufflepuff's true spirit. "Remember Cedric Diggory," Dumbledore told the assembled students. "Remember, if the time should come when you have to make a choice between what is right and what is easy." Cedric's death carried the moral weight of the entire book, and yet even then the tragedy was framed through Harry's perspective. Cedric's own world, his friends, his house, his legacy, faded quickly from focus. Rowling later admitted she regretted not giving Hufflepuff more of a voice, saying they deserved more. "Than a noble death." Ravenclaw, meanwhile, remained an enigma. Readers knew the house produced sharp minds and clever witches, yet its members lived mostly in the margins. Luna Lovegood, the dreamy Ravenclaw who wandered the castle barefoot and unafraid of judgment, became a fan favourite precisely because she broke the mould. She was imaginative, strange, and brave in her own way, traits that showed how intellect and eccentricity could coexist with courage. However, outside Luna and Cho Chang, Ravenclaw received little narrative love. Its common room was not revealed until the final book, and even then it felt like a distant mystery rather than a living, breathing space in the castle's heart. "Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure," the house motto proclaimed, but the treasure of Ravenclaw was buried under the weight of Gryffindor's spotlight. For Slytherin, the issue was not absence, but distortion. Nearly every dark wizard in modern times was said to have come from that house. The image of green-lit dungeons, whispering ambition, and cold cunning became synonymous with evil. Yet the Sorting Hat had also described Slytherin as the home of those cunning folk who use any means to achieve their ends. Ambition itself is not wicked, it is human. Severus Snape, perhaps the most complex character in the entire saga, was a Slytherin. Yet even his story, steeped in redemption and sacrifice, was told from the outside through Harry's discovery of Snape's memories rather than from Snape's own perspective. Only in the final moments of the Deathly Hallows, when Harry whispered, "Tell me one last thing, is it real or has this been happening inside my head?" did we glimpse that the lines between houses, between good and evil, had always been more blurred than the story allowed. Rowling's apology came years after the series ended, long after the Sorting Hat quizzes and house-based fandom rivalries had taken on a life of their own. At a fan convention, she remarked, "I underestimated how much readers would identify with their houses. I focused on Gryffindor and Slytherin because the story demanded conflict, but I see now that Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws felt left behind. I'm sorry, Hufflepuff." Her words resonated deeply with fans who had spent years defending the virtues of the overlooked houses. On social media, Hufflepuff fans began reclaiming their image with pride, emphasizing that their house represented loyalty, fairness, and quiet strength, virtues no less powerful than courage or cunning. If one examines the structure of Hogwarts as a symbol, it is easy to see why the imbalance mattered. The school was meant to represent unity within diversity, 4 houses, each with its own values, all contributing to a shared purpose. Yet in the narrative, unity was rarely achieved until the very end. The Battle of Hogwarts, where every house fought side by side, offered the first true sense of balance. Students from Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff defended their home just as fiercely as Gryffindors did. Ernie Macmillan, a Hufflepuff, led younger students to safety. Padma Patil, a Ravenclaw, fought alongside the Order of the Phoenix. These small moments, though scattered, hinted at the larger truth that bravery and heroism were never exclusive to one colour of scarf. In hindsight, Rowling's narrow focus may have been a narrative necessity rather than a conscious bias. The story followed Harry, and Harry was a Gryffindor. His perception coloured everything readers saw. Slytherins appeared sinister because Harry mistrusted them. Ravenclaws seemed distant because Harry's social circle rarely overlapped with theirs. Hufflepuffs remained invisible because their quiet virtues did not intersect with the chaos of Harry's destiny. Yet by the final book, even Harry recognized that courage was not confined to his own house. When he named his son Albus Severus Potter, he told him, "You were named for 2 headmasters of Hogwarts. One of them was a Slytherin, and he was probably the bravest man I ever knew." That line, perhaps unintentionally, became Rowling's clearest acknowledgement that heroism exists everywhere, even in the shadows. Still, for many readers, the damage was done. Generations grew up associating Slytherin with evil and Hufflepuff with mediocrity. The Sorting Hat quizzes became cultural shorthand. Everyone wanted to be a Gryffindor. Rowling's apology, therefore, carried not only a sense of regret, but also recognition of how deeply readers identified with these fictional divisions. Hogwarts had transcended fiction. It had become a metaphor for belonging, for identity, for the way people see themselves in the world. To be sorted into Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw and feel invisible mirrored how many readers felt in their own lives, unseen but full of quiet worth. Interestingly, Rowling later tried to correct the imbalance through supplementary works like Pottermore, where she expanded on the histories and values of each house. There, Hufflepuff's founder Helga was portrayed as the most inclusive of the 4, accepting the lot and teaching them all the same. Ravenclaw was shown as a house of dreamers and inventors, not just intellectuals. Slytherin's founder, Salazar, though flawed, was revealed as a man driven by fear and survival rather than pure malice. These expansions offered readers what the main series did not, a fuller sense of equality within Hogwarts. But they came after the fact when the cultural image of Gryffindor's dominance had already crystallized. It is easy, perhaps, to forgive a storyteller for following her hero too closely. Yet Rowling's admission revealed a rare humility, the recognition that even the most beloved worlds can harbor unintended biases. Her apology was not about guilt, but about empathy, a reminder that representation matters even in the realm of magic. For every reader who dreamed of standing beneath the enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall, wearing the colours of their house, it mattered to feel that their story counted too. Rowling's words, "I underestimated how much readers would identify with their houses," were less a confession than a lesson about storytelling itself, that every house, every person, deserves to be seen. In the end, the enduring magic of Harry Potter lies not in perfection, but in growth, both the characters and the authors. What began as a story of one boy's courage became a mirror reflecting countless readers' desires to belong. And so, Rowling's apology stands as a quiet tribute to the houses that waited too long in the shadows. The bravery of Gryffindor may have lit the fire, but it was the loyalty of Hufflepuff, the wisdom of Ravenclaw, and the ambition of Slytherin that kept it burning. Number 18, Peter Pettigrew's death. In the shadows of the shrieking shack, Peter Pettigrew's trembling hands once held the fate of heroes and villains alike. Known to his friends as Wormtail, he began as a timid boy, the least remarkable of the marauders, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. Yet it was this same unremarkable boy who would one day alter the course of the entire wizarding world. His betrayal of James and Lily Potter was one of the darkest turning points in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, an act so vile that it cemented him as one of the series' most despised figures. But in the Deathly Hallows, J.K. Rowling gave Pettigrew a brief, flickering chance at redemption, one so fleeting that many readers barely noticed it before he met his swift, merciless end. The moment came deep within the cellar of Malfoy Manor. Harry and Ron had been captured and thrown into the basement, bound and helpless. When Wormtail entered to investigate the noise, the stage was quietly set for one of Rowling's most morally complex scenes. Pettigrew, now in the service of Lord Voldemort, was no longer the nervous schoolboy who craved approval. He had become something far worse, a man enslaved by fear and guilt. Yet when he found Harry Potter struggling before him, something human flickered again in his eyes. It was not a grand gesture, nor an act of courage that would echo through wizarding history. It was simply hesitation, a brief pause when his metal hand, the one Voldemort had given him, faltered in its deadly mission. He seemed to struggle for a moment, his silver fingers slackening slightly, Rowling wrote. That hesitation was the first and only sign that there might still be a soul within him, a soul capable of remembering friendship and mercy. For a moment, the frightened boy from Hogwarts resurfaced through the layers of servitude and shame. That small mercy, however, sealed his fate. Voldemort's magic was merciless. The enchanted silver hand turned on its master. The metal hand closed suddenly around Wormtail's own throat. His eyes bulged and he fell to the floor, thrashing and choking. It was over in seconds. The man who betrayed his friends, the one who had once knelt before the Dark Lord in trembling devotion, died not by the wand of another, but by the very instrument of his servitude. Rowling crafted it as poetic justice, yet it was so abrupt that readers barely had time to understand what had truly occurred. For years fans debated whether Pettigrew's hesitation counted as redemption. Some argued it was too little, too late. Others saw in it the final spark of humanity in a man consumed by cowardice. J.K. Rowling herself later admitted that this scene, though symbolically rich, was handled too quickly. In an interview she confessed, "I wish I had given him one more moment, one real chance, to show that even the weakest among us can find courage when it truly matters." That regret opens a fascinating question. What would redemption have looked like for Peter Pettigrew if he had been given the time to grasp it? Pettigrew's entire character arc revolved around dependency and fear. Unlike Voldemort, who embraced evil through ambition, or Snape, who chose darkness out of love, Wormtail was defined by his terror of being powerless. His loyalty shifted to whoever could protect him. When the First Wizarding War turned against Voldemort, he hid among the innocent as a rat. When the tide turned again, he crawled back to his master. Yet, somewhere in that constant betrayal, there must have been a spark of remorse. Rowling hinted at it several times. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, when Sirius and Lupin corner him, he whimpers, James, you wouldn't have wanted them to kill me." It's a pathetic plea, but beneath the cowardice lies a twisted recognition of what he's done. Had Rowling chosen to linger on his final moments, the story might have offered a profound reflection on guilt and consequence. Imagine if Wormtail, gasping under the grip of his silver hand, had whispered Harry's name, not in fear, but in apology. Imagine if he had looked upon the son of James Potter and for once chosen loyalty over fear. In many ways, that was the direction the narrative seemed poised to take. But Rowling pulled away too soon, leaving only a brief flicker, where a flame could have burned bright. In the grand tapestry of the Harry Potter series, even the most minor redemptions carry weight. Draco Malfoy hesitated to identify Harry at Malfoy Manor and lived to wrestle with that choice. Severus Snape's long-hidden sacrifices redefined his entire legacy. But Wormtail's hesitation, his one moral act, was swallowed by the speed of his punishment. The metal hand's swift retribution made the scene feel more like divine punishment than character evolution. Readers were denied the emotional complexity that had made Snape's death or Dobby's sacrifice so powerful. Rowling's later comments suggest she felt that absence keenly. I had intended to show that Pettigrew's last act was one of mercy, but I wrote it too quickly, she reflected. It was meant to show that even the most despised person could make the right choice, but it vanished in the action. That admission transforms the scene when reread. The silver hand, a symbol of Voldemort's control, becomes more than a mere weapon. It represents the total enslavement of a man who traded his conscience for safety. In the instant he regained his humanity, the very tool of his submission destroyed him. There is a dark poetry to that. Pettigrew's death was his punishment and his release. The hand that killed him acted as an extension of Voldemort's will, but also as an executioner of weakness. In Voldemort's world, there was no room for hesitation, no forgiveness, for mercy. That cruel logic made Pettigrew's brief compassion the ultimate rebellion, however unintentional. If Rowling had stretched the scene longer, perhaps allowing Harry to recognize the act, it could have stood beside Snape's memories or Regulus Black's sacrifice as one of the saga's haunting moral moments. Instead, it passed in silence. When readers turned the page, the story moved on to greater battles and larger losses. Pettigrew's corpse was left unnamed, his death unmentioned by his former friends or enemies. It was as if the universe itself refused to remember him. That narrative erasure mirrors his life, a man who was always the shadow behind others, never the hero, never the villain, always the servant. His end, quick and lonely, fit that pattern perfectly, yet it also robbed the audience of closure. The complexity of Pettigrew's story lies in its mirror to the series' broader themes. The Harry Potter books constantly explore the choices between bravery and cowardice, love and fear. Dumbledore's words, "It is our choices that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities," echo through the saga. Pettigrew's final choice, his single moment of mercy, could have illustrated that message in one of its purest forms, that even the weakest can choose compassion. But his redemption was cut short before it could fully form, leaving readers suspended between pity and disgust. In fan discussions, many have compared Wormtail's death to the ancient idea of poetic justice, where the punishment fits the crime. The hand he received as a reward for saving Voldemort became the instrument of his death. Yet justice without acknowledgement lacks power. A tragedy becomes meaningful only when it is seen, when someone bears witness. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were there, but their attention was consumed by survival. The reader, like them, barely had time to register the moral weight of what happened. In that sense, Pettigrew's final act exists almost in the margins of the narrative, a whisper of redemption drowned in the noise of war. Rowling's regret reveals her deep sensitivity to moral nuance. Throughout her work, she avoids simple binaries of good and evil. Characters like Snape, Dumbledore, and even Dudley Dursley undergo transformations that challenge first impressions. By contrast, Pettigrew's journey stops just as it begins to turn. He remains trapped in the reader's mind as the cowardly traitor, rather than the man who almost found courage. He hesitated, Rowling wrote, and with that she built and ended his redemption in a single heartbeat. Revisiting that scene today, it becomes clear that Rowling was striving for more than just a punishment. She was reaching for the idea that no one, not even the weakest, is beyond choice. Pettigrew's mercy, however small, reflected the possibility of forgiveness in a world consumed by vengeance. It's a moment that invites empathy rather than scorn. If he had lived a few seconds longer, if he had spoken or cried or even looked Harry in the eye, his name might have carried the same tragic complexity as Snape's. Instead, Peter Pettigrew remains one of the saga's most haunting absences. His death lingers not because of its horror, but because of what it could have been. Rowling's admission, I wish I had given him one more chance, is more than an author's regret. It is an acknowledgement that every soul, even the most broken, deserves a final moment to face itself. In that unrealized moment, hidden between the turning of two pages, lies one of the quietest and most human tragedies of the Harry Potter world. Number 19, ignoring the Muggle perspective. When readers first stepped into the world of Harry Potter, they were introduced not just to wizards and castles, but to a very real and familiar setting, the quiet, grey streets of Little Whinging. It was a world where milk bottles stood on doorsteps, traffic lights blinked in rhythm, and neighbours gossiped over trimmed hedges. The Dursleys embodied the ordinariness of that reality, and through them readers saw the sharp divide between magic and the mundane. Yet, as the series progressed, that world, the world of non-magical people, began to fade. By the time Lord Voldemort returned to power, the story's focus had tightened so completely around the wizarding conflict that the lives of Muggles seemed to disappear from existence. Years later, J.K. Tsewutik. Rowling admitted that this was one of her regrets. She had ignored how the rise of dark forces affected the millions of people who never held a wand. This absence became more apparent as the story darkened. When Voldemort seized control of the Ministry of Magic in the Deathly Hallows, it marked the collapse of the wizarding government. Yet the consequences for the non-magical world were largely unseen. Readers knew that bridges collapsed and that disasters appeared in Muggle newspapers, but we never witnessed these events from the perspective of the people who lived through them. In the first chapter of The Half-Blood Prince, the British Prime Minister briefly meets Cornelius Fudge, who informs him about the giant killings and freak accidents that were, in truth, the work of death. Eaters. This rare glimpse into the Muggle government's knowledge of the wizarding world tantalized readers, and then vanished. The Prime Minister was left trembling in his office, and the door to the Muggle world quietly closed again. Imagine the chaos that might have followed. Whole towns could have been destroyed by magical duels, families torn apart by inexplicable deaths, and the nightly news flooded with reports of tragedies science could not explain. But Rowling chose to tell the story from within the boundaries of the magical community, keeping Muggles as distant spectators. The focus remained on Hogwarts and the Order of the Phoenix, while the people outside those walls, the very people Harry once lived among, became invisible. This storytelling decision created a powerful, claustrophobic intensity, but it also narrowed the scope of the war. When Rowling later reflected on her work, she acknowledged that everything that happened was too confined within the walls of Hogwarts, and that she regretted not showing more of how the magical war reflected upon ordinary people. Throughout the first 3 books, Muggles played a significant role in establishing contrast. Uncle Vernon's furious attempts to deny the existence of magic were as vital to the tone of the Philosopher's Stone as the letters from Hogwarts bursting through the mail slot. Mrs. Figg, the squib neighbour who served as a secret guardian, and Mrs. Dursley's obsession with normalcy all grounded the series in something relatable. Readers could see themselves in the Muggle world, feeling the sting of being different or misunderstood, but as Harry entered the magical realm completely, that connection weakened. By Goblet of Fire, the Muggle presence was reduced to the panicked campsite owners at the Quidditch World Cup, who were memory-charmed after witnessing the Death Eater's rampage. That scene, fire, masked figures, screams and Muggles levitated helplessly, was one of the few moments where Rowling briefly pulled back the curtain to show the terror inflicted upon ordinary people. The imagery was haunting. Above them, floating in the air, were 4 struggling figures, Muggles tied up in mid-air like grotesque puppets. It was a chilling moment that hinted at a much larger horror lurking beyond the frame. Yet even then, the story quickly retreated to the comfort of magical. Explanations and the Triwizard Tournament. The Muggles were silenced again, their memories wiped clean, their suffering erased as if it never mattered. This absence had emotional consequences. The Wizarding War was presented as a battle for freedom, but freedom for whom? If Voldemort's ideology sought to subjugate Muggles as inferior beings, then they were also its ultimate victims. The fact that readers never witnessed their resistance or despair left the war feeling incomplete. In the real world, every great conflict ripples across entire societies. It affects farmers, teachers, children, and the old. In Harry Potter, however, the conflict often seemed isolated within castles and ministries. We never saw what the rise of the Dark Lord meant for the family who lived next door to Privet Drive, or for the ordinary citizens who unknowingly shared a city with Death Eaters. Rowling's later acknowledgement of this omission added an intriguing layer to her legacy. She once said that in hindsight, she would have liked to expand the perspective of the final books. The Muggle Prime Minister's brief appearances hinted at an opportunity, a chance to explore political confusion, secret meetings, and rising public fear as strange phenomena swept across Britain. But those threads were left untied. Fans have often imagined what could have been an entire subplot where Muggle scientists attempted to explain the unexplainable, where television hosts debated theories about terrorist organizations responsible for inexplicable disasters. It might have shown the tragic beauty of 2 worlds colliding, the rational and the magical, both trying to survive forces they barely understood. The idea of the Muggle world being unaware of its own danger also raises questions about responsibility. Wizards like Arthur Weasley, who adored Muggles and worked in the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office, embodied a rare bridge between the 2 realities. He knew how fragile Muggles were, how vulnerable they would be against curses or magical creatures. Yet the wizarding community's efforts to protect them were minimal, almost indifferent. It seemed that even the so-called good side, the Order of the Phoenix, focused solely on internal struggles. Harry, Ron, and Hermione never once discuss how the war might be affecting Muggle London, even as they hide in the woods nearby. It was as if the entire non-magical population had been written out of existence, living ghost-like lives in the background. Hermione Granger herself represented the potential for a deeper exploration of this divide. Born to Muggle parents, both dentists, she lived between 2 worlds. Her intelligence and empathy could have offered insight into how ordinary people might perceive the unfolding chaos. Yet her parents were barely mentioned after she erased their memories for their safety. That decision, while heartbreaking, also underscored Rowling's larger narrative choice to keep the Muggle experience hidden from the reader. In the Deathly Hallows, Hermione's quiet sacrifice, sending her parents to Australia with new identities, could have been an entry point to explore the emotional devastation that countless Muggle families unknowingly suffered. Instead, it was a fleeting moment, one more tragedy swallowed by the larger storm. The deeper one looks, the more the absence becomes part of the story itself. The wizarding world's secrecy, sustained for centuries, depends on the ignorance of muggles. That ignorance is a kind of shield and a prison. Rowling's choice to maintain that boundary mirrors the wizard's own detachment from humanity. Dumbledore's philosophy, noble as it was, did not extend to bridging the gap between magical and non-magical people. The Ministry's Obliviator department made sure of that. Every erased memory, every concealed disaster reinforced the illusion that these two societies could coexist without ever truly meeting. Had Rowling expanded this theme, she might have deepened the series' moral weight. The great question of Harry Potter, the fight against tyranny and prejudice, could have resonated even more strongly if shown through the lens of those who never knew why their world was collapsing around them. Imagine a Muggle journalist investigating a series of unexplained disappearances, a school teacher trying to protect her students from unseen dangers, or a family grieving after an accident caused by a stray curse. These stories, woven parallel to Harry's, could have transformed the saga into a broader reflection on ignorance, fear, and unseen suffering. Even so, traces of this lost world linger between the lines. When Death Eaters attack the Millennium Bridge, readers are told that many Muggles fell to their deaths, yet no names, no faces accompany that horror. The Wizarding War remained bloodless for those without wands. The consequence was an emotional gap. Readers mourned Dobby and Fred Weasley, but the silent millions beyond the magical veil were forgotten. It is perhaps fitting, then, that Rowling later said she wished she had expanded the picture. That phrase, so simple, captures the essence of her regret, the realization that magic loses some of its power when it turns its back on the world it was meant to coexist with. In the end, Harry Potter remains a story of courage, friendship, and sacrifice. But within its brilliance lies a quiet shadow. The untold stories of those who never knew why the sky darkened, why their loved ones vanished, why fear crept into their streets. It is a haunting absence that gives the saga a lingering echo, a sense that something vast and human was left beyond the castle walls. Perhaps that is why Rowling's admission feels so significant. By acknowledging what she left unseen, she reminded readers that even in a world of magic, the ordinary still matters, and that sometimes the truest tragedies are the ones we never thought to imagine. Number 20, Alastair Moody's off-screen death. The night sky over Little Whinging was filled with rain and fear when the Order of the Phoenix gathered to escort Harry Potter away from Privet Drive. Among them was Alastor Mad-Eye Moody, the grizzled Auror, whose very presence inspired a mixture of awe and respect. His magical eye whirred beneath his bowler hat as he barked orders, orchestrating the escape like a seasoned general. He had fought dark wizards for decades, survived more curses than anyone could count, and trained generations of Aurors in vigilance and courage. When he stood before Harry that night, scarred and indomitable, he embodied what it meant to resist evil, no matter the cost. And yet, moments later, he would fall. Not in a blaze of glory, but off the page, his death announced almost casually, as if the storm had swallowed him whole. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the death of Mad-Eye Moody is delivered in a single, almost understated line. "Mad-Eye's dead," Lupin tells the group grimly. The words strike with the weight of thunder, but they pass quickly, giving readers no time to mourn. It is an absence that feels deliberate and cruel. The man who had taught Harry to constant vigilance vanished without ceremony, leaving only silence in his wake. Fans turned the page, waiting for a moment of grief, for a funeral, or at least a scene of reflection. But there was none. In the chaos of war, death came fast and without warning. That was Rowling's message. Still, for many readers, it felt like the loss of a friend whose farewell had been stolen. Mad-Eye Moody had long been more than just another member of the Order. He was the embodiment of the old wizarding world's resilience, a bridge between the generation that fought Voldemort the first time and the new one rising to face him again. To Harry, Moody represented a kind of rough, uncompromising mentorship. Even though much of their first interaction in the Goblet of Fire was later revealed to have been with Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise, the impression remained. Moody, the real one, was a man forged in battle. When he later reappeared in the Order of the Phoenix, scarred and grim, he became a symbol of everything that still stood firm against darkness. Losing him felt like losing the last steady light in a world descending into shadow. Rowling herself would later admit that she regretted the way Moody's death was portrayed. During interviews, she confessed that while his death was essential to maintain the tone of uncertainty and danger in the Deathly Hallows, she wished she had given him a more fitting farewell. "He deserved more space," she said. "He was a warrior, a survivor. His death should have been seen, not just told." In many ways, that single comment encapsulated what countless fans had felt. Moody was owed a moment of remembrance, not merely a sentence buried amid the chaos. Yet in defense of that decision, Rowling also explained that the invisibility of Moody's death served a narrative purpose. By the time the 7th book begins, the wizarding world has lost its innocence, the war has returned, and no one, not even the mightiest Auror, is safe. Moody's sudden off-screen death mirrored the brutal reality of war, where death often comes unseen, without heroics. It was a literary reflection of the truth she wanted her readers to face, that bravery does not always guarantee survival. Still, the dissonance between meaning and emotional satisfaction haunted the readers. For many, Moody's abrupt exit was the literary equivalent of a door slamming shut before the final goodbye. It was particularly painful because Moody had always been larger than life. His magical eye, capable of seeing through walls, invisibility cloaks and lies, became a metaphor for perception and truth in the series. He was paranoid, yes, but for good reason. He had seen too much. He warned Harry and the others to trust no one, to expect betrayal, to keep their wands ready at all times. His catchphrase, "constant vigilance," became more than advice. It became a mantra of survival. When he died, it was as if that watchful eye had finally closed, leaving the Order blind in a world filled with enemies. There is a poignant irony in how Moody dies. The man who taught others to suspect every shadow is betrayed by the unpredictability of fate itself. During the Battle of the Seven Potters, he is struck down by Voldemort while trying to protect the group. His body is never recovered. There is no body, no grave, no closure. The Order can only mourn the idea of him. Even in death, Moody remains elusive, a ghostly reminder of the cost of vigilance. The reader, much like the characters, must carry on without the comfort of seeing his end, mirroring the emotional numbness of war itself. In the aftermath, it is not Moody's body but his legacy that endures. The group still follows his orders. They still move according to the plans he made. His influence lingers in every act of defiance. When Harry infiltrates the Ministry later in the book, it is Moody's enchanted eye that appears again, now grotesquely mounted on Umbridge's office door, a trophy of corruption. That moment is one of the most chilling in the series. The eye that once symbolized vigilance and justice now watches unwillingly for tyranny. It is as though even in death Moody continues to guard and to warn. That haunting image gives readers the closest thing to a memorial he will ever receive. The lack of a funeral scene emphasizes the nature of war in Rowling's world. Death is constant, and grief must be postponed. Characters die, the living move on, and the story continues because it must. Yet it is precisely this realism that made readers uncomfortable. They had come to expect moments of closure, and Rowling denied them that. In doing so, she challenged her audience to face mortality not as a narrative beat, but as an inevitable loss that offers no explanation. Moody's death becomes less about spectacle and more about absence, an emotional void that mirrors the desolation of those fighting in the shadows. Readers often recall how Dumbledore's death was mourned with grandeur, the white tomb by the lake, the phoenix lament, the collective grief. Compared to that, Moody's passing felt like a whisper. But perhaps that contrast was intentional. Dumbledore's death represented the loss of hope, Moody's the loss of endurance. One died to teach, the other died to protect. One was a philosopher, the other a soldier. In the grand architecture of Rowling's narrative, Moody's quiet death stands as a reminder that heroes of war are often forgotten before the war is even over. Years later, Rowling's apology gave fans a form of closure that the book itself never had. Her admission humanized her as an author, showing that even she wrestled with the consequences of her storytelling choices. By acknowledging that Moody deserved more, she implicitly validated the grief of millions of readers who had felt cheated out of their farewell. In the world of Harry Potter, where loss is constant and redemption rare, such recognition mattered. It bridged the gap between author and audience, between fiction and reality. Mad Eye's story also serves as a commentary on aging warriors and forgotten veterans. He is the embodiment of sacrifice, of the toll that endless vigilance takes on the soul. Long before his death, Rowling had described him as a man living in fragments, a chunk missing from his nose, a leg replaced by a wooden one, a mad, whirling blue eye. Each missing piece is a story untold, each scar a reminder of battles fought in the dark. When he dies, he is already half gone, a relic of a war that never truly ended. His disappearance is therefore not just physical, but symbolic, the fading of an old guard, leaving the young to inherit both the fight and the fear. In a deeper sense, Moody's death completes the transformation of Harry from student to soldier. Without mentors left to guide him, he must embody the vigilance that Moody taught. The lack of a funeral compels Harry and the readers to internalize the lesson rather than mourn the man. This is how Moody survives, not through memory, but through the resolve he instilled in others. Every time Harry checks for traps, questions motives, or prepares for danger, he honors Mad Eye's legacy. His survival in the end becomes Moody's unspoken victory. Even so, the absence still lingers. Readers have long imagined what a farewell scene might have looked like. The Order gathered in silence, Tonks with tears in her eyes, Lupin's hand trembling as he sets down Moody's flask, perhaps Kingsley saying quietly, "He taught us to live ready." Such a moment would have been brief, but it would have given the man who taught vigilance the dignity of being remembered. Instead, his death remains off-page, unresolved, echoing like a curse never lifted. The tragedy of Alistair Moody lies not in how he died, but in how little the world seemed to notice, and perhaps that is precisely why his story endures. In a war filled with heroes, he was the one who watched while others acted, who protected so others could fight. His vigilance was both his gift and his doom. When his magical eye finally went dark, it did not signal defeat. It reminded every reader that courage often dies unseen, and that the truest heroes are those who fall quietly, leaving behind not applause, but the echo of their warning. Constant vigilance. Number 21, Professor Flitwick's background. Professor Phileas Flitwick often appeared in the background of Hogwarts life, small in stature but immense in spirit. He was the head of Ravenclaw House, a master of charms, and one of the few professors whose lessons never turned grim or tedious. Students remembered his cheerful, squeaky voice, the way he clapped his hands in excitement when a spell was performed correctly, and the twinkle of pride behind his tiny spectacles. Yet, as the story unfolded through 7 books, Flitwick's presence faded into the margins. His talent and courage were never given the full light they deserved. Years later, J.K. Rowling admitted that she regretted this oversight. She confessed she had underestimated how deeply readers would come to love the little charms professor who hid a powerful past beneath his gentle exterior. Flitwick's classroom, located on the 3rd floor of Hogwarts, was often filled with laughter, misfires of spells, and the gentle patience of a teacher who never lost his temper. His first memorable appearance came when he called the roll of new students in the Sorcerer's Stone, his voice high-pitched and trembling as he almost toppled off a pile of books. It was a moment that established him as a figure of comic relief, a detail that Rowling later admitted she regretted emphasizing. "I made him seem too whimsical at first," she once said. "He's far more formidable than people realize." Indeed, this same man who looked barely tall. Enough to see over his desk had once been a dueling champion, a wizard with command over some of the most intricate charm work in magical history. In The Goblet of Fire, when Harry learns about the Triwizard Tournament, Flitwick appears briefly among the crowd of professors helping decorate the Great Hall. He enchants golden bubbles to float through the air and hums with satisfaction as they sparkle above the students. This scene, while small, captures a truth about his character. His joy came from creation, not attention. Yet what many readers did not realize at first is that behind his light-hearted demeanor lay the heart of a strategist and defender. Rowling later revealed that Flitwick had trained under some of the greatest duelists in Wizarding Britain and had once competed professionally before joining the Hogwarts staff. Such a revelation changes how we see him during the Battle of Hogwarts, where he helps repel the Death Eaters with surgical precision. In the Deathly Hallows, Flitwick is finally given a moment of true action. He stands alongside Professors McGonagall and Sprout, preparing the castle's defences. When Harry returns to the school, Flitwick's small figure is described as darting among the statues, his wand a streak of light. It is easy to overlook the line hidden among the chaos of the chapter, but that is precisely the kind of subtle heroism Rowling later said she wished she had expanded upon. His duel against the Dark Wizard Antonin Dolohov is mentioned only in passing, but to those who understand dueling magic, this was no minor victory. Dolohov, known for his deadly hexes and cruelty, was one of Voldemort's most skilled fighters. Flitwick, half his size, managed to subdue him in single combat. Rowling later smiled when asked about it. "Phileas was underestimated by everyone, including me. I think he would have enjoyed that." Readers came to appreciate how Flitwick represented something rare in the wizarding world, a teacher who embodied both gentleness and immense power without seeking glory. He never lectured students with moral lessons, never demanded admiration. Instead, he celebrated their progress, no matter how small. When Hermione successfully performed the levitation charm in their first year, his delight was genuine, his praise unrestrained. "Oh, well done, Miss Granger. he squeaked. "See here. Everyone, look what she's done." That enthusiasm shaped generations of Hogwarts students, yet his role in shaping the magical world remained underexplored. Rowling later admitted that she had plans to reveal more about his heritage, his goblin ancestry, his struggles for acceptance among pure-blood peers, but space and focus on the main trio pushed those details aside. The idea that Flitwick had goblin blood added a fascinating layer to his story. It explained his height, his sharp intelligence, and his affinity for delicate, precise magic. In a world often divided by blood status, Flitwick quietly defied prejudice without ever preaching about it. He earned respect through mastery, not lineage. Rowling once said that if she could rewrite parts of the saga, she would have given him a chapter of his own, perhaps showing his youth, his days as a competitor in the dueling league, or the moment Dumbledore invited him to teach at Hogwarts. "I see him as a man who chose peace after living through too much conflict," she reflected. "A master who preferred to pass on knowledge rather than wield it as a weapon." That quiet nobility echoed in the final battle. While the books focused on Harry's confrontation with Voldemort, McGonagall's leadership, and Molly Weasley's duel with Bellatrix, Flitwick's bravery remained in the shadows. Yet his role was crucial. He organized the defensive charms that protected the castle walls and coordinated spellwork that delayed the Death Eater's entry. His magic was subtle but strategic, barriers of energy, repelling curses, and intricate charm work that only a true expert could sustain. It is easy to imagine him, wand flashing, voice calm, instructing frightened students as explosions echoed in the distance. Rowling later said she wished she had shown more of his courage, especially since it represented the kind of quiet heroism she admired most. Even outside of battle, Flitwick's wisdom often went unnoticed. During the chaos of the Prisoner of Azkaban, when Dementors flooded the school, he was the one who helped enchant the doors of the Great Hall for protection, a small act mentioned in a single sentence. In Order of the Phoenix, he discreetly supported Dumbledore's army, pretending not to notice when students borrowed spellbooks for independent practice. His understanding of their cause was unspoken but profound. He believed in education as rebellion, a subtle form of resistance that would prepare them for a world beyond Hogwarts. Rowling's apology for neglecting him came years after the final book. In a podcast interview, she laughed softly when asked if there were any professors she wished she had developed further. "Flitwick," she answered without hesitation. "I loved writing him, but he kept getting pushed out of the spotlight. He's so capable, and readers sensed that even when the text didn't say it outright. I suppose I underestimated how fond people would grow of him." Her tone, gentle but wistful, revealed a genuine affection for the character she had left partially unwritten. Fans have since imagined their own versions of Flitwick's past. Some write stories of his days in the dueling championships, where he might have faced off against dark wizards and earned his reputation as a master of precision. Others picture him as a young scholar, rejected by elitist circles, but determined to prove that intellect and creativity matter more than blood. The beauty of his character lies in how much remains unsaid. Like a charm performed with subtle elegance, his mystery adds depth to the entire Hogwarts tapestry. His relationship with Dumbledore also invites speculation. Both were men of immense magical ability who valued kindness over power. Dumbledore entrusted him with the defense of the school, an implicit acknowledgement of his skill and integrity. It is possible that Flitwick's calm presence was essential in balancing the more intense personalities of the staff. McGonagall was stern, Snape brooding, Hagrid emotional, but Flitwick brought warmth and rationality. His presence reminded everyone that intellect could coexist with empathy, that greatness could come in small forms. Even Harry's generation owed more to Flitwick than the books revealed. Many of the spells they relied upon, Alohomora, Protego, Wingardium Leviosa, were taught in his classroom. These were not dramatic, destructive spells, but tools of problem-solving and defense. In that sense, Flitwick shaped the very essence of how Harry and his friends approached magic. They used charm work not to dominate, but to protect, to outthink, and to endure. Rowling once remarked, "Filius represents the heart of Hogwarts, brilliance without arrogance." It is telling that during the aftermath of the war, when peace finally settled over the wizarding world, Flitwick was one of the professors who stayed. Others retired, moved on, or sought rest, but he returned to his classroom, his enthusiasm undimmed. Perhaps he saw teaching as the purest kind of magic, one that repaired the world without spells or wands. The same man who once dueled dark wizards now corrected homework on the proper pronunciation of Actio, humming quietly to himself. Rowling's regret in this light feels almost poetic. She wished she had shown us more of the man who embodied Hogwarts' enduring spirit. Over time, Flitwick became a symbol of humility for many readers. His absence from the forefront of the story came to represent the countless unrecognized figures who hold institutions together, not the heroes who lead, but those who teach, support, and inspire from the sidelines. In the end, perhaps his subtle presence was a lesson in itself. Greatness does not always need a spotlight. Sometimes it lives in the margins, waiting patiently to be noticed. And when readers finally turned their attention toward him, they discovered that behind that cheerful voice and modest height stood one of the most extraordinary wizards Hogwarts ever knew. Number 22, neglect of secondary female characters. There is a moment in J.K. Rowling's legacy when the magic of Hogwarts meets something very human: regret. Not the kind born of creative fatigue or a minor plot oversight, but a deep realization about representation. Years after completing the Harry Potter saga, Rowling admitted she felt she had failed to give proper attention to many of her female supporting characters. The admission struck readers like a whisper through the corridors of Hogwarts, a reminder that even in a world filled with spells and courage, silence can linger around those who were never fully seen. When we think of women in Harry Potter, names like Hermione Granger, Professor McGonagall, and Nymphadora Tonks come immediately to mind. Powerful, intelligent, brave women who stand shoulder to shoulder with their male counterparts. Yet, beyond them, the magical world teemed with other girls and women whose stories flickered only briefly before fading into the background. Rowling's own words, "I wanted Hogwarts to be alive, filled with different destinies, but not everyone received their chance," reveal that she, too, sensed this imbalance. Consider Parvati and Padma Patil, the twin sisters from Gryffindor and Ravenclaw. Their names appear throughout the series, shimmering at the edges of the action, yet they remain shadows. Beautiful, exotic, yet distant. We remember Parvati's disappointment when she attended the Yule Ball with Harry, a moment of quiet humiliation that went unnoticed by the hero himself. Parvati was looking sulky and sultry, the text notes, but she had not spoken to Harry for half an hour. Her story ends there. A line, a look, a silence. Imagine the world behind that look, a girl navigating rejection and invisibility within a castle that never stopped buzzing about someone else's destiny. Lavender Brown's story is even more haunting in retrospect. Introduced as a giggling, lovesick teenager, she became a symbol of superficiality and comic relief until her tragic end in the Deathly Hallows, where she dies fighting a werewolf's attack during the Battle of Hogwarts. The same girl once mocked for her crush on Ron Weasley becomes a fallen soldier, but her death passes almost unnoticed. The narration gives her no farewell, no final thought, no voice. It is a small absence that echoes loudly when one looks back. Rowling later acknowledged that characters like Lavender deserved more, not just to die bravely, but to live fully within the story. Penelope Clearwater, Percy Weasley's girlfriend, is another ghostly figure of potential. She is petrified by the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets, and though her suffering becomes part of the plot, her personality remains a mystery. We never learn how she feels about Percy's ambition or his later betrayal of his family. She is reduced to a name. Penelope Clearwater, a Ravenclaw prefect. A description as cold and polished as the surface of the mirror she might have once looked into before walking into danger. Madame Pince, the librarian of Hogwarts, embodies an entire world of possibility. The gatekeeper of knowledge, the silent observer of generations of students. Madame Pince looked like an underfed vulture, Rowling wrote, turning her into a caricature rather than the rich, complex character she could have been. The woman who watched over the castle's intellectual heart is remembered only for her sharp nose and scolding tone. Behind her, one might imagine a lonely life among dusty tomes, a keeper of secrets who once dreamed of casting spells beyond the library walls. Then there is Madame Hooch, the flying instructor whose eyes were yellow like a hawk's. Her introduction in the Philosopher's Stone crackled with energy, a woman of precision and control, capable of commanding a sky full of children and broomsticks. Yet, after that first thrilling moment, she nearly disappears from the series. She trains a generation of young wizards to fly the very foundation of Quidditch, the pride of Hogwarts, and then fades into obscurity. What became of her? Did she mourn the students who fell in battle? Did she fly in the final defense of the castle? We never find out. Rowling's regret seems rooted in precisely these absences. While male characters like Neville Longbottom, Seamus Finnegan, and even minor professors such as Lupin and Slughorn evolve over the books, their female counterparts often remain frozen. They serve as mirrors, reflections of the main characters' journeys rather than protagonists of their own. The magical world, vast and vivid, offered space for infinite lives, but too many of its women were written as notes in the margins. One of the most striking examples is Cho Chang. Introduced as Harry's first love interest, she was initially portrayed with grace and intelligence. Yet as soon as grief overtakes her after Cedric Diggory's death, the narrative subtly punishes her for her emotions. She becomes the crying girl, her depth reduced to sorrow. She was angry with him for kissing her, then crying, then angry again, the narrative notes, almost mocking her confusion. But what else could she have been? A teenage girl mourning her boyfriend, burdened with guilt, trying to survive the aftermath of trauma. Rowling later admitted that Cho's story could have been handled with more empathy, not as a plot obstacle, but as a genuine exploration of pain and healing. Even characters like Molly Weasley, though beloved, were defined primarily by their roles as mothers and caretakers. Her fierce duel with Bellatrix Lestrange in The Deathly Hallows gave her a moment of unforgettable power. "Not my daughter, you bitch." But this explosion of strength came after years of being framed through domestic labor and worry. We love Molly for her warmth, but rarely do we see her desires, her inner life beyond her kitchen and her children. She is a woman of immense courage, yet her story is told only through others. The comparison to Bellatrix Lestrange is telling. Bellatrix is chaos, madness, obsession, and a woman who defies all categories and pays for it with damnation. Rowling gave her depth, charisma, and darkness, and Helena Bonham Carter's portrayal turned her into an icon. But Bellatrix's presence highlights what the others lack. She is allowed to be monstrous, passionate, and whole. In her, Rowling poured a dangerous kind of freedom, the kind denied to most other women in the saga. Professor Trelawney, too, is a character who teeters between ridicule and brilliance. Her prophecies shape the entire destiny of the series, yet she is mostly treated as comic relief, the eccentric woman with too many shawls and too much sherry. When she is fired by Umbridge and humiliated in front of the students, the moment is tragic, but fleeting. "No, I'll stay here," she whispers, clutching her crystal ball. The woman who foresaw Voldemort's return deserves more than pity. She deserves respect for the burden of foresight. Rowling herself once said she regretted that Trelawney's tragedy was never given proper closure. Hannah Abbott, Susan Bones, Angelina Johnson, names that flash like stars for a moment and then vanish. They represent the young women of Hogwarts who fought, studied, laughed and loved within the castle walls. In the final battle, many of them return to fight, risking their lives, but the narrative rarely pauses to show their faces. Their courage, though equal to any man's, remains unnamed in the grand tale of victory. Rowling's acknowledgement of this imbalance did not come from external criticism alone. It came from reflection. She built a universe where women were powerful, but often symbolically so. Hermione is the intellect, Ginny the spirit, Luna the imagination, McGonagall the authority. But those on the fringes, Parvati, Padma, Lavender, Madame Pince, are the forgotten echoes of that same magic. Their silence tells us something profound about how, even in fantasy, women's voices can vanish when the narrative focuses too tightly on the chosen few. What makes Rowling's regret so compelling is that it feels honest. She did not seek to rewrite her past work or justify her choices. Instead, she looked back and said, "I understand now what I could have done differently." In a world where authors often defend every decision as sacred, this humility stands out. It reminds readers that storytelling is a living act, one that evolves as society does. The unspoken tragedy of Harry Potter is not the deaths or the battles, but the untold lives of those who stood in the shadows of its heroes. The girls who danced at the Yule Ball, studied in the library, or tended to the wounded in the Great Hall. Their stories are written between the lines, waiting for someone to read them. Rowling's apology, in essence, invites us to do just that. To look again, to listen to the quiet voices, and to see the women who are always there, keeping the magic alive. Number 23, Madame Pomfrey's Untold Story. Madame Poppy. Pomfrey has always stood at the edge of the spotlight, tending to others while never drawing attention to herself. In the world of Harry Potter, where every character seems to carry a past carved in magic and sorrow, Pomfrey remained curiously untouched by backstory. Yet she was there, always there, through broken bones, cursed wounds, and poisoned students. Her white apron and firm, no-nonsense tone became as familiar to Hogwarts as the tolling of its bells. And still, behind that composed exterior, readers sensed there was more, something human, perhaps tender, that J.K. Rowling herself later admitted she never had the chance to explore. "I loved Madame Pomfrey," Rowling once confessed, "but I never gave her a story with a soul." It was one of those rare moments when an author publicly mourned a lost opportunity within her own world. Madame Pomfrey's presence stretched quietly across all 7 books, a steady thread of healing amid chaos. When Harry's first Quidditch match ended with a broken arm, it was she who scolded Lockhart for his foolish spell that turned the bones into jelly. "You should have come straight to me," she said, in the Chamber of Secrets, and readers could almost hear the restrained fury in her voice, a professional, humiliated by incompetence. That moment, small as it was, defined her. Competent, caring, intolerant of nonsense. But who was the woman behind that brisk authority? What heartbreak or hope had led her to dedicate her life to the endless parade of injured children? Rowling never told us. Over the years, fans constructed theories. Some imagined she had once been a healer in St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries, where the chaos of war or personal loss had driven her to seek the quieter refuge of Hogwarts. Others believed she had once loved a professor, perhaps even Dumbledore, and had chosen to remain at the castle for reasons of loyalty or grief. These stories were never confirmed, yet they reflected the same yearning that Rowling later voiced, the wish to know who Madame Pomfrey truly was. For a woman who mended the wounded, there was irony in the fact that no one ever tried to mend the silence surrounding her own heart. In many ways, Pomfrey's absence of backstory mirrored her personality. She was a healer of few words, always moving with purpose, her identity consumed by duty. When the Triwizard Tournament unleashed chaos, she worked tirelessly to repair Cedric Diggory's burns and the dragon's victims, saying little, feeling much. When the Battle of Hogwarts erupted, she stayed behind, tending to both friend and foe. Rowling wrote that Madame Pomfrey ran between the cots, wand flashing, a rare image of courage that went largely unnoticed. She was never written as a fighter, yet she fought daily against death, pain, and despair. It's telling that Madame Pomfrey never once sought recognition. Her world was confined to the hospital wing, a sanctuary of whispered spells and white sheets where laughter sometimes mixed with tears. She scolded Harry when he risked his life again, muttering that the boy spends more time in here than in his dormitory. Behind the humour lay a maternal affection that no spell could disguise. She was not a teacher nor a warrior, but in her quiet constancy she embodied something that few others in Hogwarts did, steadfast compassion. Rowling's regret about leaving Pomfrey's story untold reveals much about the emotional architecture of Harry Potter. The series, rich with trauma and recovery, depended on healers like her, though she remained a background figure. In interviews, Rowling once reflected that Pomfrey deserved more than to be a nurse without a past. Perhaps the reason she felt this way was because Pomfrey represented a rare form of power, the kind that doesn't shout or duel but restores. In a saga dominated by conflict, Pomfrey's quiet heroism was easy to overlook. Imagine, for a moment, the life she might have lived before Hogwarts. Perhaps she was a student who excelled in herbology and healing charms, mentored by a long-forgotten professor. Perhaps she once treated wounded auras during the First Wizarding War, her steady hands saving lives while others fought on the front lines. She might have seen too much death, too many young faces lost, and decided that her true calling lay not in battle, but in prevention, to heal rather than to fight. The castle, with its wounded children and its ghosts, could have become her redemption. There's a certain poetry in Rowling's apology. Unlike other characters whose arcs ended in triumph or tragedy, Pomfrey's story was an unfinished melody, a gentle hum beneath the grand orchestra of Hogwarts. Rowling often said that every character in her books had a story, even the ones who appeared only for a moment. But Madame Pomfrey, she admitted, slipped through the cracks of time and narrative, not because she was unimportant, but because the story was too full, too crowded with destinies. In a world of prophecies, she was the one who simply showed up and did her job, never needing a prophecy of her own. Throughout the series, Pomfrey's presence often coincided with moments of moral restoration. When Hermione was petrified, Pomfrey's care became symbolic, the promise that light could still return to the paralyzed. When Ron was poisoned, her touch, combined with Slughorn's quick potion, brought him back from the edge. Even when Harry returned from the graveyard with Cedric's lifeless body, Pomfrey was there, trembling but unbroken, confronting the unspeakable. She bent over him, muttering spells under her breath, the book said, her face pale as parchment. In those few lines, readers saw more humanity than in entire chapters about duels and politics. What Rowling's apology does is remind us that even an author can overlook her own healers. The admission came years after the series ended, when fans began compiling questions about background characters. Rowling, candid as ever, replied that she regretted not giving Madame Pomfrey the inner world she deserved. To her, Pomfrey had been a symbol of stability, a pillar that held Hogwarts upright while others faltered. But fiction demands conflict, and Pomfrey, ever competent, offered too little of it. That, Rowling suggested, might be why she remained unexamined. She was too whole in a world built on brokenness. Still, the absence of her story leaves a haunting beauty. Readers are free to imagine who she loved, what losses she endured, and why she never left the castle. Some envision her as a muggle-born who fought for her place in a prejudiced world, finding in Hogwarts a home that accepted her. Others see her as a war widow who poured her grief into helping others. Every theory is a form of storytelling love, a collective attempt to heal what Rowling left wounded, an unfinished narrative. It's fascinating how Pomfrey's limited presence created such a strong impression. She appeared in nearly every book, yet never stepped outside her ward. And still her moral clarity resonated. When Dumbledore died and the castle wept, readers could almost see Pomfrey tending to the wounded students, her eyes red, her hands trembling, but her work unbroken. She was part of the invisible network that made Hogwarts more than stone and spells. It made it human. Had Rowling written her story, perhaps it would have been one of endurance. A young healer entering Hogwarts when Grindelwald's shadow still loomed over Europe, learning that wounds never truly vanish, only fade. She would have stayed through wars and new generations, watching children grow, fail, and rise again. Her strength would have come from repetition, the thousand small miracles of recovery that no one wrote about. Pomfrey's magic was not about spectacle, it was about the quiet victory of care. Even the name Poppy Pomfrey carries a gentle symbolism. The poppy, long associated with remembrance and healing, stands as an emblem of compassion after loss. It's as though Rowling named her subconsciously as a tribute to those who mend what war breaks. The surname Pomfrey, soft and melodic, evokes comfort, suggesting that her very identity was bound to nurture. Yet, despite such poetic design, her interior life remained sealed behind the curtains of the hospital wing. When Rowling voiced her regret, it wasn't just about one character. It was about the overlooked people in every story, the ones who heal but aren't healed, who give without ever receiving attention. In the end, Pomfrey symbolizes the quiet figures in all great sagas, the ones who hold the world together while heroes chase destiny. The author's apology was an acknowledgement that even magic cannot undo a mission. Yet perhaps that absence gives her a strange immortality. Because she was never fully known, she remains open, infinite, a character readers can continue to imagine, heal, and complete in their own minds. And so, Madame Pomfrey stands in the background of history, not as a forgotten nurse, but as a reflection of Rowling's own humanity, the admission that even in fiction we sometimes neglect those who keep the world alive. When the castle fell and rose again, she was there, steady as ever, wand in hand, eyes tired but resolute. Maybe that is her story after all, not one of mystery or tragedy, but of devotion, the kind that never needs to be written to be real. Number 24, Crabbe and Goyle's unfinished arc. In the world of Harry Potter, where even the smallest characters often find redemption, the fates of Vincent Crabbe and Gregory Goyle remain some of the most strikingly unresolved threads in J.K. Rowling's universe. They were there from the beginning. Two lumbering shadows who flanked Draco Malfoy through every corridor of Hogwarts. Together they embodied everything that seemed petty and cruel about schoolyard hierarchies. The bullies, the muscle, the mindless laughter at others' expense. Yet despite being constants in 7 books, their stories ended not with transformation, but with silence, one consumed by his own curse, the other fading quietly into obscurity. Rowling would later admit that she regretted never giving them the depth or redemption they might have deserved. From their very first appearance in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Crabbe and Goyle were inseparable from Malfoy. When Harry first meets them in the Great Hall, their description sets the tone for everything that follows. They are thick-set and mean-looking boys who looked as though they had been born to follow orders. Rowling paints them as extensions of Draco's ego rather than characters in their own right. They laugh when he laughs, sneer when he sneers, and their purpose seems simple, to intimidate and to echo. But even in those moments, observant readers sensed that these boys were not born villains. They were products of their world, pure blood families steeped in prejudice, loyal to the Malfoys, and raised in the shadow of Voldemort's ideology. As the books progressed, Crabbe and Goyle evolved very little on the surface. In the Chamber of Secrets, they became literal disguises for Harry and Ron through Polyjuice Potion, a narrative irony that revealed how interchangeable they were meant to seem. Their lack of individuality was a narrative choice, perhaps deliberate, to contrast them with Draco's sharp cunning. Yet this absence of individuality is precisely what makes their final fate so haunting. Readers came to expect that at least one of them, likely Goyle, who seemed slightly less cruel, might eventually question the path he had taken. But Rowling's narrative, burdened with the growing darkness of war, left no room for such reflection. By the time of the Half-Blood Prince, their presence had diminished. They were still seen guarding Draco, now tasked with keeping watch as he attempted to repair the vanishing cabinet in the Room of Requirement. There was a strange loyalty in them, though it went unspoken. They were not cowards. They did not abandon Draco even as the stakes became lethal. In another kind of story, this might have been the beginning of their redemption, a moment where the followers begin to see their master's fear and question their own purpose. But Rowling, juggling dozens of arcs and a sprawling war narrative, left them in the background. They became silent witnesses to Draco's unraveling. Then came the Deathly Hallows and the Battle of Hogwarts. When Crabbe, Goyle and Malfoy cornered Harry, Ron and Hermione in the Room of Requirement, something shifted. For the first time, Crabbe acted on his own. The boy who had spent 6 years following orders suddenly took initiative, summoning the deadly fiendfear, an uncontrollable, living flame that consumed everything in its path. Like snakes, the flames hissed and coiled, Rowling writes. A dragon reared, and the fire became alive. In this moment, Crabbe's transformation is not moral, but destructive, he becomes the embodiment of chaos, of youthful arrogance unchecked by understanding. He loses control almost immediately, and the fire devours him. His death is not heroic, nor is it mourned by anyone in the book. It is simply a consequence, a brutal punctuation mark on a character who was never allowed to grow. Rowling later confessed that she regretted this outcome. In interviews, she explained that she had envisioned a deeper arc for one of the boys, possibly Goyle, but that there was no dramatic space left by the time she reached the final chapters. The story had grown too crowded with heroes, traitors, and martyrs. "I missed my chance," she said, and though brief, that admission resonated with readers who had wondered what could have been. It was one of the few times Rowling openly acknowledged a creative regret. Fans understood it not as a failure of imagination, but as a casualty of narrative focus. In the chaos of war, not every lost soul can be redeemed. Still, the tragedy of Crabbe and Goyle lies in how they mirror the theme of choice, one of the central pillars of the Harry Potter series. Time and again, the books remind readers that it is our choices, not our abilities, that define us. From Snape's redemption to Draco's subtle moral hesitation, Rowling's world is built on the possibility of change. Yet Crabbe and Goyle are denied that chance. Their fates are almost Shakespearean in their inevitability. One dies by his own hand, consumed by the darkness he unleashed. The other disappears entirely, neither redeemed nor condemned, a ghost in the margins of history. Some readers speculate that Rowling's regret stems from how their story could have served as a counterpoint to Draco's. Imagine if Goyle, witnessing Crabbe's death, had realized the horror of what they had become. His silence could have been a moment of awakening, a reminder that even the smallest players in a tragedy can feel the weight of their actions. Instead, Goyle survives without resolution. After the Battle of Hogwarts, he is never mentioned again. There is no indication of his fate, no reflection, no aftermath. For a series so obsessed with closure and moral reckoning, that absence feels deliberate yet strangely hollow. It is telling that Rowling herself used the phrase missed opportunity. In the careful architecture of her world, almost every character arc finds its echo and completion. Neville Longbottom transforms from timid boy to hero. Dudley Dursley evolves from bully to awkward gratitude. Even minor figures like Percy Weasley and Creature the house elf are given redemption. That Crabbe and Goyle were left behind feels like a contradiction to the series' moral logic. They remained symbols, not souls. And perhaps that was Rowling's true lament, that in a story about empathy and growth, she had created two boys who never learned either. Rereading their final moments, one can't help but feel a flicker of sympathy. When the fiend fire begins to consume the room, it is Goyle who panics, desperately trying to flee, while Draco yells for help. Harry and Ron save both Draco and Goyle, dragging them to safety even as the flames roar around them. "If we die for them, Harry, I'll kill you!" Ron shouts in fury. But they do not let go. It is one of the great ironies of the saga. The heroes save those who once tormented them. And yet, even after that act of mercy, Goyle disappears from the story. No gratitude, no change, just silence. Had Rowling given herself more time, Goyle might have become something unexpected. Perhaps he would have been the first of the Slytherins to publicly renounce Voldemort's ideology. Perhaps he would have been haunted by Crabbe's death, turning into a quiet, remorseful man working in obscurity. Fans have imagined fan fictions and alternate endings where Goyle attends Hogwarts reunions years later, sitting quietly in the back, unwilling to speak, but clearly changed. It's these unwritten stories that haunt readers as much as any canon loss. There's a deeper literary sadness in their fate, too. Crabbe and Goyle were born into a world that never expected greatness from them. They were bred to obey, to sneer, to support. The narrative never pauses to show their homes, their families, or their fears. Unlike Draco, who receives glimpses of humanity through his mother's love, Crabbe and Goyle remain faceless extensions of ideology. Their end serves the story's drama, but not its empathy. That perhaps is what Rowling mourned most, the failure to humanize the faceless. In a saga about love, choice, and redemption, their fate is a reminder that not everyone escapes the shadows. Crabbe's death is the price of ignorance. Goyle's disappearance, the consequence of emptiness. Rowling's apology, subtle and reflective, was not just to her readers but to her characters. She recognized, perhaps too late, that even the smallest villains deserved a moment of grace. For a storyteller who built an empire on the idea that light can be found even in the darkest of times, leaving two boys forever in darkness was a wound she felt keenly.